Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Friday, the 8th of November here in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Powell signals a readiness to defy Trump in defence of the Fed as the central bank cuts rates by a quarter point.
The Bank of England governor says the Chancellor's inflation-stoking budget won't lead to a slowdown in rate cuts.
Plus, supermarkets in the UK are offering Wagyu steaks from British farmers for as little as £5. But is the meat really comparable to the Japanese delicacy?
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell has made clear he's ready to defend the US central bank from political pressure after the re-election of Donald Trump. Following the Fed's unanimous decision to cut rates by a quarter point, Powell was repeatedly asked in his press conference about his position under the incoming administration.
Some of the president-elect's advisors have suggested that you should resign. If he asked you to leave, would you go?
No.
Can you follow up on, do you think that legally you're not required to leave?
No.
Do you believe the president has the power to fire or demote you, and has the Fed determined the legality of a president demoting at will any of the other governors with leadership positions?
Not permitted under the law.
Not what?
Not permitted under the law.
President-elect Trump told Bloomberg in June that he might want more of a say in interest rates, though added he'd let Jerome Powell serve out his current term, which ends in 2026. The Fed chief's remarks were notable as he worked hard to dodge every other politically charged question from journalists.
In the near term, the election will have no effects on our policy decisions. As you know, many things affect the economy, and anyone who writes down forecasts in their job will tell you that the economy is quite difficult to forecast looking out past the very near term. Here, we don't know what the timing and substance of any policy changes will be. We therefore don't know what the effects on the economy would be.
Powell's comments came after the Federal Open Market Committee cut benchmark US rates to a range of 4.5% to 4.75%.
President-elect Trump has named his campaign manager, Susie Wiles, as his incoming White House Chief of Staff. Meanwhile, finance and business executives are in the frame for a raft of other top roles in the new administration. Wall Street is closely watching who Trump will pick as his Treasury Secretary. Hedge fund managers Scott Bessent and John Paulson are both thought to be in contention, alongside the former SEC Chair Jay Clayton and also the former US Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer.
The leaders of Ukraine and Russia are jockeying for position with the US president-elect. Donald Trump says he's spoken with Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky since the result, but not yet with Vladimir Putin. Speaking at a gathering in Sochi, the Russian president shared his hopes for working with the new US administration.
I do not want to comment now on what was said consciously during the election campaign. I think it was said deliberately in the fight for votes. But it does not matter. What was said in the desire to restore relations with Russia to help end the Ukrainian crisis, in my opinion, seems to deserve at least attention. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate him on his election as President of the United States of America.
That's Vladimir Putin speaking there through a translator. On the campaign trail, Trump predicted he could end the Russia-Ukraine conflict the day after his election, but has given so far little indication of how he would approach the challenge. The soon-to-be 47th President of the United States says he plans to speak with Vladimir Putin during an interview with NBC News on Thursday.
The Bank of England governor has supported Rachel Reeves' budget, saying that it won't slow the pace of rate cuts, despite predicting that the Chancellor's policies will push inflation up by almost half a percentage point to 2.8%. Policymakers at the Bank of England effectively endorsed a further 4 quarter-point cuts by the end of next year. Speaking to Bloomberg, though, Governor Andrew Bailey said the pace of change at the Bank of England would be subject to global conditions.
There are a lot of uncertainties out there, both in the world and there's domestic uncertainties as well. So we've emphasised the word gradual again because we're going to have to take account of how those uncertainties play through. I'm not really in a position, I'm not going to, any of us are in a position to say, well, gradual means every so often. That is not a judgment that we make.
Andrew Bailey speaking to Bloomberg's Francine Lacroix after the Monetary Policy Committee delivered a quarter-point interest rate cut to 4.75% yesterday. Meanwhile, new data released this morning by the Recruitment and Employment Confederation and KPMG shows hiring at UK businesses fell at its steepest pace since March in anticipation of tax rises from the budget. The report is closely watched by the Bank of England to gauge cost pressures.
HSBC says its first round of job losses is due in weeks. The Europe's biggest bank has been planning a major restructuring to combine many of its business units. Boss of the new global wholesale banking division, Michael Roberts, told Bloomberg speed is key.
I've been in drip type of restructurings, very painful for our employees, but very painful for clients. And we're very much aware that this is distracting, this is disruptive. So we're going to try to do this as quickly as possible. I'm talking weeks before we announce the first level, and that will be followed by several other weeks. I mean, we're going to be working very, very quickly.
Roberts added job losses will be concentrated at the senior level and the full scale of redundancies will be known by February. The revamp has been presented as an answer to investor concerns over the bank's survival against competition from regional banks and fintechs.
Now, Goldman Sachs has promoted 95 executives to its partnership, the most for any year since 2010. The Wall Street firm is unique among its peers in keeping the system where partner is the highest position in the bank. 26 of the new partners are women, 4 are black and 6 Hispanic. The partnership now consists of over 400 executives, less than 1% of Goldman Sachs's workforce.
Those are your top stories on the markets. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index is up by 0.3%. Eurostoxx 50 futures are 0.3 higher and the 10-year Treasury yield is up a basis point to 4.33%.
Now, in a moment, we'll bring you more on the central bank decisions we had yesterday, plus Trump's appointments and how farmers are cashing in on Britain's taste for premium beef. But if you're thinking about the weekend, I am certainly, you should read the latest from our Top Shelf newsletter. This is from Cara Newman, who is Bloomberg's cocktail and spirits expert. Must say, I didn't know we had a cocktail and spirits expert.
I know. When did we miss the applications for that job?
Exactly. She has this delightful job. She talks about the litmus test for any bar being how they deliver the basics, i.e. a good martini and a Negroni.
Do you get gripped by decision paralysis when you're faced with cocktail lists where you're like, I want the classic, but also I'm very excited by this other thing, which is usually something mad?
And that's what she's been investigating. She says she usually goes for the kind of the martini, but lately she's started to order the weirdest cocktail on the menu, and she's been writing about how it's been a really eye-opening experience.
The cigarette martini, which apparently is described as like kissing someone after they smoke a cigarette. That is a very odd description.
Very 90s.
And yet, indeed, and yet very attractive. And I quite liked one of the other drinks that she highlights in the newsletter as well, which is the Fireball revamp, known as Cryerball, because it includes apparently human tears.
I have no idea how you would include that into a drink. But anyway, one thing that you might want to be thinking about for your weekend, from one of our writers this morning.
Let's bring you more now in our top story in the decision by the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates yesterday. But it was Jerome Powell's readiness to withstand pressure to quit that was a more striking development as the Trump transition ramps up. Joining us now with more, Bloomberg TV anchor Kriti Gupta. Kriti, good morning. So Jerome Powell dodged lots of questions, and we heard some of them there about politics and policy, but he did engage with some of the questions about his own job.
He was asked if he would resign if President-elect Trump asked him to, and the answer was a very simple no. Nothing more added, just a simple no. He did say it was not permitted under the law for that to happen, but really stuck to the script, did not expand much on what he had to say. And I think that makes it quite clear. And I think for our international audience, the context is key here in that when he's talking about what is and is not permitted under the law, you have to have Senate approval to replace. So whoever would potentially pick or replace Jerome Powell has to be approved by the Senate. And then in terms of the mandate for the Federal Reserve, which remember has a dual mandate unlike several of the other central banks around the world that we keep an eye on, it keeps an eye on both employment and inflation. There's a dual mandate, whereas, say, the ECB, for example, only has an inflationary mandate. That mandate changes if Congress approves it. The problem is we've never done that before. The other problem is that this is the first time we may actually, and it's not confirmed yet, but we may have a red sweep in the Senate and the House of Representatives with a president at the helm of that from the Republican Party. It makes it easier to change that mandate. But again, this is a mandate that goes back decades, if not even longer than that. So you really want to keep an eye on how that progresses. But the mandate is more likely to change than the actual pick itself.
Yeah, and the independence of central banks seen as absolutely central to getting better economic policy and outcomes, basically. That's why there's independence, isn't there? But look, the exchange was certainly curt, and it does perhaps look as if the battle lines are maybe being drawn between the Fed and the White House. 10 weeks to go until Trump is actually in the White House. In terms of the other posts, we're getting more details around the 4,000 government jobs that are going to be filled by the new incoming administration. As you say, Republicans on track to win total control of the government, it seems, at the moment. What are the key roles and individuals we're thinking about?
Yeah, there's a couple of them outside of the Federal Reserve. And look, this is going to be a rotating cabinet in terms of who is actually going to be the biggest players. But I think the one that we know for sure from overnight is Susie Wiles. She was kind of the campaign manager / de facto chief of staff during Trump's kind of post-presidency term, and she will now be the first female chief of staff in American history. So this is a massive deal, regardless of what party you are affiliated with. She's someone who has long been a Republican political operative. She comes from the state of Florida. Her dad was a NFL broadcaster. So she is kind of in this world of mass America and is very patriotic, for lack of a better term, and is therefore someone who has proven success in this political comeback. And that was part of the kind of speech and praise that Donald Trump had given her when making this announcement. Some of the other names as well that stood out to me is Marco Rubio as a potential candidate for Secretary of State. This is significant because Marco Rubio ran against President Trump in 2016. And he also is someone who is not only from Florida, but has been very engaged with the Latino vote. If you look at this election, the biggest demographic that Trump has managed to flip has been Latino men. And Marco Rubio has been key to that strategy, despite, of course, them having a little bit of their beef back in the day. They do seem to be allied on this front. So he's someone who could be considered. And then plenty of others kind of in the works for Treasury Secretary. Scott Bassett seems to be one who's been very outspoken against Janet Yellen. He's a hedge fund manager and a major player on Wall Street as well, who's been very, very crucial in terms of using the Treasury as a way to expand the protectionist agenda, which is something that the Treasury is usually a little insulated with, given it kind of deals with currency and issuance. And Scott Bassett might change that.
OK, Kriti Gupta, thank you very much for joining us this morning with the latest on what's going on in the US.
Now, Britain is indulging in a growing appetite for Wagyu beef, and it's an opportunity for farmers. The number of Wagyu cattle in Britain has more than doubled to over 35,000, as consumers are willing to pay more for premium meat. Joining us now to discuss is Bloomberg's UK retail reporter Jennifer Creary. Jennifer, good morning. What exactly is Wagyu beef? I thought it was Japanese.
Well, Wagyu literally translates to Japanese beef. It's among the best meat in the world, and that's because it has a really high fat content. It's melts in your mouth, it's buttery, it's umami, it tastes really delicious. But as a result, it's really expensive. You know, you're looking to pay hundreds of dollars on just a steak of Wagyu in Japan at least. But as a result, it presents a pretty lucrative offer to kind of restaurants, suppliers, as something to cash in on.
Well, what is driving that growing demand, and particularly when we think about where it's coming from in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of this goes back to the pandemic. So during COVID, we were taught to kind of shun eating out and eat at home, particularly with kind of ensuing inflationary pressures on household budgets. And so as a result, consumers were looking to trade up on more kind of premium items to kind of treat themselves. And Wagyu just becomes part of that story. So we're seeing a growing trend of premiumization. And Wagyu is associated with, high quality meat. And so as a result, consumers want to kind of treat themselves to the occasional Wagyu steak.
OK, so then how are farmers overseas then making it work? It's expensive. You can see the attraction maybe of offering it to more picky consumers, but how are farmers making it work for them?
Yeah, so what's really interesting is that in Japan, there are 4 official Wagyu breeds. And, they're not the easiest cattle to raise. And, Japan has really clamped down on the export of kind of live genetics. But, there is a small herd outside of Japan. So one of the ways that overseas farmers are making this work is by breeding Wagyu cattle with some of their local dairy herds. So in the UK, at least, we see a lot of kind of crossbreed cattle. So you mentioned earlier the number of Wagyu cattle in the UK has more than doubled last year to more than 35,000. And the majority of that are crossbreed cattle. And that's one of the ways that farmers are able to scale up a lot quicker and meet that growing demand for Wagyu.
Jennifer, have you tasted both of them? And is there a difference?
Yeah, there definitely is. Listen, and if you were to put a British Wagyu steak in front of a Japanese consumer, I think they'd be expecting something a lot different too. The farming techniques in the UK are different. The kind of feed that they're given is different. It's a lot more grass-based, and it does affect the texture of the meat and the taste. It's a bit chewier in the UK. In the UK, we're more used to chewy steaks. But it is a better quality steak. It does have a higher fat content. But if you're going to your local supermarket, your local Waitrose or Aldi, and you're expecting to find a Wagyu steak that you get in Japan, you're probably going to be disappointed.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.